We've arrived in St Francis, which is right up in the north of Maine along the Canadian border and the banks of the St John River. So, we plan to tackle the 100-mile Allagash Waterway. Water levels are very low at the moment. We have our canoe, 17-footer and a half, and we've done a mock pack. As you can see, it's going to be a very tight fit. Tomorrow at 7 o'clock, our friend Norman picks us up, drives us out to the headwaters of the Allagash, and from there, we're on our own. Departing California in summer's Yukon, we follow Interstate Highway I-80 across the US, aiming for Maine in the far northeast of the country. A journey of over 3,000 miles that takes us 8 days.
Lovely. A nice ear lick. That's just what I need, nice clean ears.
Once we reach the Atlantic coast, there's still a long, windy road to the far northeast. Loaded with supplies, we eventually arrive at Pelletier Camp in the tiny town of St Francis. The campsite is a picturesque, grassy plot alongside the winding St John River. The opposite bank belongs to a strange land called Canada, where it is said folk gabble in a foreign lingo. Once we're settled in, it's time to sort out the gear for the journey. On a 10 to 14 day expedition, we don't want to forget anything, but then we don't want to bring too much. Both scenarios are inevitable.
There's always just too much stuff. Cricket assists with the firewood collection now that the packing is done, and I set to making a fire. By the time it gets dark, steaks go on the grill, while spuds roast in the coals. Cricket is generally quite attentive around this time of day. As promised, our transporter is here. We begin to load our immense amount of equipment into the van and our watercraft onto the roof rack. Norman shows us a much more effective canoe lifting technique than what we've used in the past.
There, I'll let you push it straight there. Good. We'll tie that and we'll push it. Good. That's it?
While the Yukon stays back in town, we set off into logging country.
We're in the van and we've just turned off onto the gravel road to head out into the woods with Norman, who is our transporter and also Allagash Wilderness Advisor.
Yeah, that's me, all right. I never was called that, but that's a good way to say it.
Well, you see what I just did then? Yeah. By calling you our Wilderness Advisor, if anything goes wrong, that's shirking the blame off myself.
Yeah.
Mid-journey, we must stop at a checkpoint to pay fees and acquire permits before entering the North Maine woods. These forests have a long history in logging, starting in 1840. The Allagash River, deep in the heart of forestry operations, was first protected in 1966 and then upgraded in 1970 as a state wilderness area. 500 feet from the high water mark is all protected wilderness, and beyond that, forestry operations continue as normal. The value of this industry is the sole reason why the region has survived an onslaught of development and civilization. The river may not be truly wild in the sense of being untouched by man, but the illusion of wilderness is convincing. The objective is the southernmost put-in point at the Chamberlain Bridge.
Once at our destination, we must offload our equipment down to the water's edge, making sure not to forget our canoe. Leaving that strapped to the roof would be an embarrassing oversight. The fact we've swamped our vessel before even launching is not an auspicious sign. As we blunder about at the water's edge, Wilms makes a way over to the ranger's station to register, so someone might know to look if we go missing in the wilds.
Well, we've arrived at Chamberlain Bridge and we need to turn our muck pack into an actual pack. This is a procedure we'll have to get used to, as loading and unloading will be a daily event. Well, we're about as ready as we can be, so I guess it's time to launch.
Well, this is a little posher than I expected. We've got a fireplace, someone's even cut wood for us, a bench, and even a structure to put a tarp, and somewhere out there in the wilds will be a thunderbox.
So we've decided to make this our first campsite. It's called Murphy's Field and it's on the shores of Telos Lake, quite possibly one of the southernmost campsites along the entire waterway. Although it's only been a relatively short day, refreshments are in order.
Noodles, a winner every time.
Today is day one of the trip. So we started off by getting dropped off at Chamberlain Bridge. Then, because we want to do as much of the waterway as we can, we've backtracked into Telos Lake, and here we are now at Murphy's Field campsite, and that's way up on this end of the lake.
With a belly full of noodles, it's time to undertake a very important activity. Things go surprisingly well, with Cricket being a great help, herding in the catch, a very enthusiastic fishing dog. Although it may not be considered a frenzy of activity, there is enough interest to have me carry on late in the day under the watchful eye of an aquatic denizen. So these magnificent specimens are being caught at the moment. I believe them to be a type of a whitefish, but I can't be sure because I'm a bit new to this area. However, with Cricket being very excited, and there goes that bloody fish. Our first night's dinner is going to be steaks, isn't it?
Yeah.
And spuds roasted on the fire. We're going to do the fresh food thing for about the first 4 nights, and then if we don't catch fish, ones that we're going to eat, after that it's just pasta packs and dry stuff. Here we are lakeside, ready to go mid-morning. We did have intentions of an early start, but that didn't happen. I'm not even sure if it's going to. We have potential for wind troubles in the afternoon. That's why we should be starting early. We're in northern Maine in October, and it feels like we're in Florida. This is crazy.
It has to be said that it's actually late September. Mr. Foreman does have a rather distorted perception of time. We're just getting back to Chamberlain Bridge, which is where we launched from yesterday. So this is now when we start heading north down the Allagash. From the narrow passage north of the bridge, we emerge into Chamberlain Lake, easily the largest of the lakes along the watercourse, roughly 14 miles long and averaging about a mile wide. The lakes along the Allagash are not natural features, but rather the result of several dams and locks created solely for the logging industry. Loggers, wanting to avoid floating their goods through British-controlled ports in Canada, instead used dams to reverse the flow of the river and send the lumber south. With the help from a canal dug at the far end of Telos Lake, lumber floated into an east branch of the Penobscot River and then onto Millinocket and Bangor for processing and sale. Less than 2 miles up on the western shore, we reach Ledge Point campsite, just south of a large bay and 2 distinct spikes of land. The locals here include a very sleepy squirrel and a curious gray jay looking for handouts.
What are you trying to do, Summer?
Well, I'm trying to make a fire.
Wilms is in charge of lighting the fire, but is finding her progress impeded by a little monster, making life a lot tougher than it needs to be. Against incredible odds, a blaze begins to take hold, and if the dog doesn't eat all the firewood, we should be in good stead. After all this, one little dog is now ready for some important business. That is to venture back out onto the lake for some fishing. On the water, cast after cast yields nothing, so Cricket and I paddle up to one of the rocky spits of land to try the fly rod. While we carry on in vain, with not a fish to be seen, Wilms enjoys a swim, an unusual activity considering the time of year. Me and Cricket surmise there are no fish whatsoever in these waters, and it is but Wilms alone in this vast lake.
The following morning we set off again following the shoreline. Our next campsite is approximately 10 miles ahead, but today we have a side trip planned. For a while we join a raft of mergansers following the edge of the lake, but soon enough we diverge from our course to cross to the eastern side. Out in the middle the waters become a little choppier, but not too fierce. Our navigation proves uncharacteristically accurate as we make landing on a bouldery beach with a little dock and some wreckage.
So we're at the site of Chamberlain Farm on the Chamberlain Lake, which is pretty much deserted and all overgrown now with wreckage and ruin. So over here, we have a rather large broken propeller off a vessel that's obviously not in use anymore. And just over there, there's a second one, which I dare say is probably from the same vessel. Now, although everything else is in ruin, the one remaining structure has been renovated, and this is now a sporting camp. Sporting probably translates as hunting or fishing, but obviously for use for those in the know. The long abandoned Chamberlain Farm was once an important depot for loggers in this remote part of the world, providing food for workers, produce for livestock, and all manner of equipment and goods. The 600 acres has now gone back to the forest.
Standing in it, aren't they?
So I'm guessing this wreckage is a hull of a boat. And how it got here, whether it was by storms or whether it was dragged in, I couldn't say. But she won't be floating again. We've had 3 unseasonal, hot, sunny days to paddle in. It was a little windy today to add to the challenge. And I think the heat's getting not only to me, but Cricket as well, who's right out there in it. We're at the end of Chamberlain Lake, and I think we got a 3/4 mile portage to get across into Eagle Lake next, and that should be some good work tomorrow, but we'll see how it goes. Well, after a hard day of paddling, it's time for that winning combination. Noodles. Cricket's quite disappointed, wondering where is her bowl of tasty noodles. Jack Russells require frequent beatings to keep them in line, though I'm not sure who's coming off the worst. Needless to say, the little dog is warming up for another bout of fishing lakeside. A couple of casts with a spinning rod and a stinker strikes the lure, and Cricket helps herd it in. Even the fly rod yields results, but still no trout.
Even though we're in the woods, suitable firewood can be tricky to find. The waterway can be very busy during the summer, and much of the freshly fallen wood has already been plundered. Some campers prey on the living trees, which is not good. Fallen logs quickly go rotten in these damp forests, and what looks like a nice chunky piece is in fact a sodden, crumbling mess of corruption. Naturally, fungi thrive in these environments, and a keen mycologist would have a field day exploring the varieties of fungus feeding on the rotting wood. Later in the day, the wind dies down and the lake becomes like glass. We have views of the mountains south from Telos Lake where we started, but these conditions are not to last. In the next stage of our adventure, we tackle a lengthy portage and discover a treasure trove of historical relics. We get battered by a thunderstorm and hammered by rough conditions. Make sure to join us for part 2 of the Allagash Wilderness Waterway.